crashes, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis, Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts with host David Lamb and the attorneys of Hollis, Wright.
Hello and welcome in to the attorneys. Thank you for joining us tonight. Looking forward to our conversation. Kind of the ground rules of how this works in case this is your first time with us. We'd love to have you join that conversation. Ways at the bottom of the screen for you to do so. Also, attorneys are standing by live to speak with you, so you can take advantage of that opportunity as well. Hollis Wright makes that available all throughout the show tonight, so the opportunity for you to speak with an actual attorney. Now, leading our conversation, he's the managing partner of Hollis Wright. Josh Wright, good to see you, sir.
Good to see you, too. How you doing?
I'm good. Are you all right?
We're fabulous. Doing great. Great weekend, and just kind of recharged and ready to go tonight.
Ready to roll.
Absolutely. So we're going to be talking about divorce, child custody issues. And, David, you know, divorces are a little bit on the decline, generally, nationally, compared to where they were just 20 years ago. But they can be super costly, very expensive, if you don't have the right attorney and you don't have someone lead guiding and directing you through that process. Yeah. So we're going to be talking about those issues tonight and how to avoid those pitfalls to make sure that you are protected if you or a loved one is going through this type of divorce. And so we're very lucky tonight to have Matt Griffin, who's been on the show before. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you.
Yes, sir.
And Matt, his office is in Pelham. You work at Shockley, Ransom Sparks.
That's right.
And tell me a little bit about your practice and kind of how you got into this area of the law, because it's a unique area of the law.
Right, it absolutely is. So I went to Birmingham School of Law right here in downtown Birmingham for law school. I was fortunate enough to clerk in a domestic relations judge's office through my law school career. So that gave me a really good insight into this type of law, and I've been able to try to build my practice around the specialization of domestic relations law, working with families.
So as it relates to kind of the process, which we call domestic relations, that can be a very long, expensive process if you don't have the right people kind of leading you through that area. And so, you know, how do you get started with someone when someone comes to you and says, "Hey, look, I'm thinking about divorce"? I mean, do you find yourself almost counseling them at first? I mean, how does that work?
It's just a conversation, just like we're having right now. Everybody's family is unique, and you're basically trying to put a square peg through a round hole in that situation, because you're shaping these laws around these experiences that everybody has within their family. So it's basically a conversation that you would have with somebody, and you really just want to get a feel for what's going on, who the players are, if they have children, assets, debts, just the all-encompassing thing that would be everyday life. And that's what makes this type of law very unique, because you're really dealing with a little bit of everything here. Yeah. It's very personal. You got to be very comfortable with the person that you're working with. There has to be a lot of trust. So basically, you really just want to be comfortable with who you're talking about, working with or talking to, and just get a feel for each other and kind of what the goals are.
Yeah, so, you know, Matt is dealing with not only assets, but division of assets, debt, child care, custody, child support. I mean, there are so many issues that go into this. And so ultimately, you want to make sure you surround yourself with the right person.
You know, I'm curious because there recently been some high-profile divorces. Some of them have gone so smooth, even though there's millions of dollars in the middle, and some have been dumpster fires. Just every bad thing about each other has been aired. In your experience, for kind of divorces to go smoothly, are there a couple of common kind of themes or attitudes or behaviors with that?
I would say it was important to have a skilled advocate on your side that knows what they're doing and can point you in the right directions. What's worth fighting over? What's worth actually litigating? What's worth going through the discovery process over? If you have a skilled person who knows what they're doing on your side and is working with another skilled divorce advocate, which we have a lot of them here in Birmingham. That's very important, because you can pick out the big issues, so to speak, and try to really hash those things out even before maybe getting to litigation or even doing the discovery process. You can try to pick those things out. There are going to be problems down the road so that you can kind of shape how this is going to go as much as you can.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about contested versus non-contested divorces, because that's a question we get a lot, which is, can I go this on my own with my spouse if we're uncontested? But I suspect what you will tell me is a lot of times people think they're uncontested and then it turns into a contested divorce. So how do you advise people through that process?
Right. So to get what we call a non-contested divorce in Alabama, you really have to know kind of what we want to do, and you kind of have to be on the same page, right? So those are much more common in situations where you don't have a ton of assets or debt. Maybe we already kind of have a plan where people are going to live as far as children are concerned and that sort of thing. That's much more realistic in that type of situation. You file a complaint, you put some other pieces of documents together to get executed. You execute what's called an agreement. That's the most important thing. It's a contract between you and your spouse, basically spelling out exactly what's going to happen. File it in with the court. 30 days later, a divorce judge can sign off on it and you be divorced. But that may not be possible in all situations due to, again, if you have medical debt, student loans, children, houses, vacation homes, 401ks, that's why it's very important to talk to somebody before you start.
If you've got assets and debts and kids, is Alabama a state where there is an equal division of those assets and debts, or how does that work in Alabama?
Right, so divorce courts in Alabama are courts of equity, which means that there's only one judge who decides both the law and the facts if you have to have a trial in your situation. So there's no juries or anything like that. And what a court of equity has is immense power to divide assets and debt allocation and children. Basically, a divorce judge, following certain parameters and case law, can have a huge impact on your life moving forward because they have immense power in the state of Alabama. It doesn't always mean equal, it just means what's equitable in this situation based off of all the circumstances in your marriage.
So let's take an example. If someone, let's say they do not have a lot of resources and assets at the time they get married, and then throughout a marriage they acquire assets and resources, are those generally evaluated post-marriage? Are those assets that become part of the marital estate?
Right. So basically take your date of marriage moving forward outside some specific parameters as far as, if somebody was to receive some money that they put towards the marriage beforehand as far as buying assets, that can get kind of into the weeds there. But typically from the date of marriage moving forward, outside of some certain circumstances like inheritance, or if you were to keep a lump sum of cash and didn't use it for the benefit of the marriage, that can be protected in a divorce. But most of the time it's going to go what I call into the pot, and the judge is going to have the power to divide that asset or debt up.
Yeah, and you can see how this can get super complicated. And so having someone, like Matt, be able to lead, guide, and direct you through the process is super important. I know we're getting ready to go to break, but when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about how the child custody and child support components work to this and the impact of those on the divorce itself.
All right, we're stepping aside our first break of the evening. Stay tuned. More of The Attorneys coming right up. I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis, Wright, a personal injury law firm, and thank you for watching The Attorneys. We hope you, a friend, or a loved one never needs legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple: to provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Your call to the show is free and off air. So if you have questions specific to the show or related to other accident or injury topics, call, email, or text us. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, or go to hollis-wright.com and click on the Contact Us button. We know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us and watching The Attorneys.
The Attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis Wright, are here to serve you.
When we started the show 8 years ago, my hope was we would be able to do what we do best, which is to help people answer real-world legal-related issues they have in their life.
People oftentimes are confronting various legal issues and problems in their lives that range across the gamut of legal practice areas. Bankruptcy, criminal law, family law, just to name a few. And to be able to have a 30-minute platform or format to where we can just cover various legal topics once a week, That's obviously the primary focus of the show.
That we would be able to use the resources of the many lawyers we have at this law firm to create a plan that had a lasting impact that also gave back to the community at the same time. And I think we've done just that with the attorneys.
Welcome back in to the attorneys. About to get back to our conversation. Before we do so, a reminder, the attorneys that are standing by live to speak with you if you choose to take advantage of that opportunity. 844-LAW-TALK, 844-LAW-TALK to speak to an actual attorney standing by live right now. Josh?
All right, so let's talk a little bit about, we mentioned dividing up assets and potentially debts in a divorce to the extent that there's counsel involved and it's contested and kind of how that process works. When you add children to the mix, it's a totally unique circumstance.
Absolutely.
Let's talk just a little bit about that piece. And I think the jumping off point there is, how do you advise people when they come in and talk to you about, hey, am I going to lose my kids? Do I have visitation rights? How do you start to advise someone through that process?
Right. So if children are ever involved, that's the most important thing that's going on inside the divorce. The court's going to treat it that way. Judge is going to look at it, hey, we'll figure out what's going to happen financially and debt allocation and that sort of thing. But number one, are children safe? Are they being cared for? Are they in an environment that's fostering their maintenance and their well-being and that sort of thing? So during the initial stages of a divorce, typically divorce judges want to do what's called keep status quo in place. So they're more likely going to not pull kids from certain school districts or even their jurisdiction, certainly, but they're going to try to make it where we've got to get through the week, the month, the next 6 months while this divorce is going on. And that's going to be dependent on what's been happening so far, just like anything else in a divorce or a marriage. Where have the kids been living? Who's taking care of them on a daily basis? What is everybody's role in the household, really? And that's what I really try to figure out first before I start telling people what their options are.
And so what happens with, for example, a child? At what stage does the child get to have some level of influence and an opinion about where they stay, those types of things? Do the courts consider that?
They can, and it typically would be a child that would be older, maybe in their teens, just because dealing with teenagers, as everybody knows, is a little bit more difficult than dealing, or I shouldn't say more, but different than dealing with a 5-year-old in that regard.
No, it's more. No,
yeah, I understand.
You were right the first time.
You were right the
Yes,
first
sir.
time, buddy. Nice catch,
Right.
but no, you were 100% right.
Right. So if that ever becomes an issue to where the court needs to hear from a child, they can do things called an in-camera interview where the judge can talk to a child directly and actually talk to them, or they could actually appoint what's called a guardian ad litem to represent their best interest.
Okay. And when does child support end for a child generally? Is it when they reach 19, when they go to college? How does that work?
Right. So typically, most of the time, it's when a child reaches the age of 19. We call it aging out at that point. You reach the age of majority. If a child becomes self-supporting or they basically emancipate themselves, you can make a case to end child support early. You can get into the back and forth and the weeds about credit and arrearages and that sort of thing with child support, but typically at 19.
Yeah, I mean, it is adding the child component. I mean, as you know as a dad, just child generally is tough enough to manage, and managing through one of these processes is super difficult. You want to make sure you've got the right people with you.
A question we've got here about dating. And while going through all this, I don't know how common this is to you, but what do you advise in terms of, I guess, folks that are ready to move on?
Right, and certainly people are ready to move on. That's why we're getting divorced from each other. If you start dating or seeing somebody inside of a divorce case, it's only going to complicate things. Ultimately, a judge may not weigh that into their decision as much as you think they would, but it's ultimately going to complicate things because you're introducing another party into the situation. You're also could be creating fault on your end as far as showing your pattern behavior that may have been going on during the marriage. So I would never advise somebody to start a relationship while they're going through a divorce.
Matt, talk about this for a second. As far as wrongdoing that creates a divorce, whether it's infidelity or other circumstances, how much of that is actually weighed into the judicial decision for kind of how assets are divided, how children are divided, et cetera. I mean, is that a component at least taken into consideration?
Absolutely. If you get into a contested situation and you're litigating and you're going through the discovery process, you're going through that discovery process for a reason. A lot of the time it's to figure out where money's coming from, where it's going, bills and that sort of thing. But it also can be used to show fault. And we do that to show that, hey, judge, you know, if you have to make a decision, we wouldn't be standing in front of you but for this other party's actions. So when you're making your decision in regards to your equitable distribution of things, it certainly can weigh into what the judge deems fair at that point when they're making their decision.
Is there a guarantee set rule on how a home is divided? For example, let's say husband, wife with children live in home. There's a divorce. I mean, is it set that the husband's got to move out of the home, and if the wife was the primary caregiver to the children, she gets to maintain the home? I mean, do they have to sell the home to create an asset and then divide that? I mean, how does that all work out?
If you can't reach an agreement as far as negotiating back and forth between the parties and figuring out what we're going to do with this asset, and the court and judge has to make a decision what they're going to do with that asset, it's going to come down to a lot of things. Is there a mortgage on the home? Whose name's it in? If somebody can afford to, quote unquote, keep the home based on the current mortgage payment, if somebody trusts their spouse to what we call indemnify themselves to keep making that mortgage payment. But if a judge at the end of the day has to go, okay, everybody wants the house and obviously there's only one, typically we'll put it on the market and sell it, and then they'll make a decision about who's going to receive what as far as if there's any equity in the home at that point.
Yeah, and you know, you can imagine, like, to take a good example, credit. Like someone's credit, you know, Matt's talking about, you know, a spouse indemnifying. Well, imagine the emotions that sometimes get involved. And then all of a sudden, I'm sure Matt's getting calls and saying, look, my credit's being destroyed because my spouse is not actually indemnifying me. What do I do? And, you know, the answer is probably for Matt, we're going to file something with the court and we're going to get in front of the court right away to protect you. But, I mean, you can imagine just the maintenance involved in going through this process can be very complicated. You want to make sure you got someone like Matt on your side. Yeah.
Let's step aside. Our final break of the evening.
Perfect. I want to talk about alimony afterwards. Alimony is still alive in Alabama under certain circumstances.
All right. We'll get into alimony when we come back. Also, a reminder, Hollis Wright is a great follow on social media. Check him out on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, everywhere you are. They are really a good resource for you to follow there on social media. Stay tuned. The final segment of The Attorneys coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright. As with any industry, it's important in the legal world to hire an attorney that is knowledgeable and has a track record of success. But with so many attorneys out there and so many different types of cases, how does someone decide the right lawyer to hire? In this week's Legal 4-in-1, we're answering the question, what should I consider in hiring an attorney? In-state versus out-of-state, big firm or little firm, recommendations from friends or family, the internet, the phone book, or TV. With so many choices and so much information, it can be an overwhelming task trying to make the right decision. To complicate things, choosing a lawyer is an important and sometimes life-affecting decision and should not be taken lightly. So how do you select an attorney? First, do your research. Look the firm up on the internet. Learn about the cases they handle and the results they get. Second, find out what clients are saying about the firm. Many websites provide client testimonials or have a star ranking system. Use those to your advantage. And finally, talk with a lawyer from their office and ask them questions. Questions about the volume of cases they handle. Do they return phone calls? Are you just a number or a client that gets the attention you deserve? Please remember, your call, email, or text to the attorneys is free. All of us at Hollis Wright want to help answer your questions on real issues you face. Remember, a competent lawyer will respond to every question you send in. That's our pledge and promise to you. Thanks for watching The Attorneys right here on WBTM 30.
Welcome back into the attorneys. This is the final segment, just under 8 minutes remaining in the show. So if you want to take advantage of the attorneys who are standing by or get involved in the show, got about 8 minutes to do so. Josh?
All right, so when we went off, I wanted to talk just a little bit about alimony. There's been some level of confusion over the last 20 years, during my practice at least, as to whether alimony is, allowed, if it's not allowed. What's the status of alimony in Alabama right now?
Right. So in 2019, alimony changed in Alabama. They issued a new statute that kind of controls what judges are supposed to work within as far as parameters are concerned. It's less likely now that somebody gets popped for what they thought of for elder alimony until somebody dies, remarries, cohabitates, etc. It's much more likely now that a judge is going to look at your unique circumstance, the length of your marriage, the earning capacity for each party, fault like we've talked about before, what we have to pay for, who can pay for what, and everybody's basically stature during the marriage. Now, nothing's going to be the same after a divorce because it just can't be. But that's typically what the things that they're going to look at, and they're going to try to keep things as close to as possible, so to speak, as equal or as near to what was happening during the marriage as possible. And oftentimes, like I said, that's impossible, but they're going to take a stab at it. And it's going to be more along the lines of the duration of your marriage and something that we call rehabilitative alimony that's paid per month to somebody, another spouse who may have been dependent on another spouse as far as the income's concerned. And it's going to try to be paid out over a certain amount of time and have an end date that would be met, and then the alimony obligation would cease. That's much more likely now. You have to get into the 20, 25 years before a judge is going to really consider, okay, you have to pay somebody per month a monthly amount until they die, remarry, or cohabitate with a member of the opposite sex. That's kind of what they would look at.
Go ahead, David.
A question we got that goes right along with that is it sounds like an ex-wife is having trouble finding her ex-husband, and he's not really participating in the process at all. When it comes to things like alimony and obligations, if somebody goes underground, what can be done to help her? Right.
So I'll have folks that come to me and say, well, my husband or my wife just left, and I don't know where they went. Nobody wants to wake up one day and that happen, but it can happen. Typically, in that situation, a court's going to let you do, upon motion to the court, serve somebody what's called serve somebody via publication, right? So you file your complaint, and then you make some come up with some reasons and then sign some affidavits for the court stating your reasons for doing so, along the lines of, hey judge, we've looked for this person, they can't be located, I've tried to contact family, I've looked on Facebook, I've looked in the filing system to see if we can find them. They can't be found. So what we do is we serve them via publication in your local legal newspaper, and it's got to run for a consecutive 4 weeks, and then you go to the court and basically say, hey, this is good service now, judge. They haven't responded and they're ignoring this process. Can you enter a default judgment against this person? So in Alabama, there's nothing the other party can do or not do to prevent you from getting divorced from that person. They can drag it out, they can try to disappear, they can not answer a complaint, they can drag their feet. At the end of the day, you're going to get divorced. And that's why I think it's important to talk to somebody about your options and what may be best for your situation.
What is the, as far as attorney costs go, can you ask for, if someone is at fault to create the divorce, can you ask for the other side to pay attorney costs?
Yes, and that's very common, especially in marriages where one party may have not worked or worked in many years, and that comes back to the arguments that would come back to the alimony consideration. But that's certainly something that you can ask for at the end of the divorce process. You would have to show some of the things that we talked about dependency as far as their income and the fact that, they may be the cause of the breakdown of the marriage, and then you can have a judge agree with you that, yes, they should have to pay for this because they've caused all of this. It's much more likely to have an attorney fee award, in my experience, in something called a Rule nisi, when you're trying to hold somebody accountable for something they didn't do or did do that they were supposed to do inside of a divorce case. And that would be a post-divorce situation.
An issue that I actually get a lot with clients that we represent that we will send out to guys like you for divorce is I have a spouse, and my spouse is college educated like me, but has not worked for 10 years, 12 years, and she's helped raise our family. How is that taken into consideration in the divorce itself? Does the educational level of the individual matter insofar as that person can go back to work? Does it not? How does that weigh
It
in?
absolutely does, because even if somebody hasn't worked during a marriage, and just like we've talked about previously, nothing's going to be the same after the divorce, right? So a judge is going to look at that and go, well, you have the ability or capability to go out there and use your degree, and it may take you a little while. And that's when we come back to the issue of what we call rehabilitative alimony, to say, okay, we're going to give you time to get back on your feet, but you're going to be expected to go out there and support as much as you can yourself and get a job and that sort of thing. And that's just much more common now, because a lot of households, both parties work. It's just not like it was, in the 1940s or 50s. A lot of people have both parties work in a household, and you're probably going to have to continue working after a divorce.
Yeah, David, the process of divorce, very similar to the civil realm, where 85 to 90% of those civil cases actually settle before they get to a jury trial. A vast majority of what Matt's dealing with also settle before they get to a judge trial. And so having someone lead, guide, and direct you through that process to make sure you're protected and that you can resolve your claim in a way that's positive for you and for the overall marriage is really, really important.
We're just about out of time, about a minute and a half remaining, but time enough for a final thought from the both of you. Matt, if you would, you go first, please, sir.
Absolutely. I think it's very important for everybody, if you're going through this type of situation, to reach out and try to talk to somebody who deals with this type of law. It can be intimidating. It can be certainly daunting to think that you're going to have to come up with a bunch of money to go pay somebody to represent you. But most divorce attorneys that I know either offer free or very affordable consultations, just so that you can see what your options are. And it's always better, no matter what legal situation that you're facing, to find somebody who specializes in that type of law and to go talk to them just to see what your options are, because it can be very scary and very stressful.
And there is light at the end of the tunnel if you have to go through this. The recommendation that I would make is you want to set yourself up with a lawyer that not only is going to be an expert in a, quote, killer in the courtroom, right? You want to set yourself up with someone who can also counsel you through the process, because the best advice you receive at the beginning may be that you want to stick this marriage out, right? So you've got to be with someone that's willing to be open-minded and objective to evaluate counseling options, as well as to get you to the litigation side if it's necessary. Matt's one of those guys, and we're super excited to have him on. I'm glad he came on, and he's just a specialist in the area. So good job, Matt.
Thank you all so much for having me.
Great job.
Great job. Appreciate you all being with us. And as always, we really appreciate you being with us each and every Sunday night. That's going to do it for this episode of The Attorneys, but we'll look for you next week, where we'll be right back with another legal guest here for you. Thanks so much, and see you next week.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by Hollis Wright.